Before time had a name, the galaxy was a canvas of screaming plasma and nascent stars. It was a realm of profound, terrifying silence, broken only by the whispers of creation itself. In this burgeoning cosmos, there existed the Old Ones. They were beings of impossible intellect and psychic might, the first sentient life to achieve true mastery over the material universe. They were gardeners of reality, seeding worlds, sculpting species, and weaving the very fabric of space-time through their mastery of the Imperium, the roiling sea of psychic energy. They were eternal, patient, and utterly aloof, but in a forgotten, irradiated corner of the galaxy, under the glare of a malignant, dying sun, another race crawled from the dust. They were the Necrontyr, a people defined by their suffering. Their bodies were frail, cancerous things, their lives a pathetic, guttering flicker in the face of an eternity that did not want them. Their civilization was built upon a foundation of shared misery. Their cities great metallic tombs designed to shield them from the very star that gave them life, yet poisoned them with relentless radiation. They looked to the stars not with wonder, but with visceral, burning hatred. They hated the stars that poisoned them. They hated the silent void that offered no solace. But most of all, they hated the Old Ones. They envied the Old Ones' perfect, immortal bodies, their effortless mastery of the galaxy, their casual shaping of life. The Necrontyr, in their desperation, saw the Old Ones not as progenitors, but as cosmic tyrants who hoarded the one thing the Necrontyr craved above all time. Their pleas for succor for the cure to their genetic curse were met with the same crushing indifference the void offered. Despair unified them. Rage focused them. Their science, born of this profound bitterness, pushed further than any sane mind would dare. They shattered the barriers of reality, not with the psychic harmony of the Old Ones, but with cold, hard physics. And in doing so, they found something. It began as an anomaly in their deepest stellar probes, a shadow against the brilliance of a star. Not a shadow, but a hunger, a patch of darkness that consumed light. They found vast ethereal intellects, entities of pure energy that had existed long before the Old Ones. They were the universe's first children, gods of gravity and electromagnetism, feeding on the very hearts of suns. They were the Satan, the star gods. The Necrontyr, in their hubris, sought to categorize the impossible. The first they truly identified was a shroud of anti-life, a vortex of cold entropy that drifted between systems. Where it passed, stars withered and life recoiled. They named it Azagorad, the Nightbringer, for it was the personification of the cold, inevitable death they so intimately feared. Then they found Magladroth, the Void Dragon. It was not a creature of shadow, but of blinding, intricate light. It sang songs of physics that could unmake worlds, a being of pure, cold logic and infinite technological possibility. It was the master of the material realm. And then there was the one who saw them, the one who turned its impossible gaze from the heart of a sun to the trembling, insignificant ships of the Necrontyr. It was Mephitran the Deceiver. A thing of silver light and golden lies, it was not just feeding, it was aware, it was bored, and it saw in the Necrontyr a tool. Mephitran's essence breached their comms, not as sound but as an impression of thought, a voice like shifting glass and broken promises echoing directly into every mind. It was brought before the Triarch, the ruling council of the Necrontyr, and their leader Sarek, the Silent King. Sharek was the last of his line, a ruler burdened by the collective agony of his entire species. He saw his people unified only by their shared death sentence, their culture nothing but a monument to their own extinction. Mephitran the voice is not heard but felt. It is cold, ancient, and laced with a terrible, amused intellect. You are broken. You are fleeting. You curse those who live while you yourselves merely cease. You build monuments of metal to house your dying flesh. Such a tragic, pointless expenditure of energy. Zarek, his voice is raspy frail, amplified by a throat vox. He stands tall, but his physical weakness is apparent. Who? What are you? Another cosmic parasite. Another god to ignore our prayers. Mephatron, I am no god. I am the answer. I am the means to your end. The end of your suffering, the end of your weakness, and the end of your enemies. The deceiver wove a tapestry of glorious falsehoods. It spoke of unity. Not the unity of shared suffering, but the unity of a single indomitable purpose. It spoke of eternity. Not a hollow echo in a tomb, but a vibrant, unending existence. It promised them bodies that would not fail, minds that would not falter. And it promised them revenge. Revenge against the indolent old ones who watched them suffer and did nothing. Zarek, what price do you demand for this miracle? Mephatron price. It is a trade, an exchange. We are energy. You are masters of the material. You will build us bodies, shells of the living metal you craft, so that we might walk among your stars and teach your enemies humility. In return, we will give you bodies of that same metal. We will make you eternal. You will be our army. We will be your gods. Together we will bring silence to this loud, chaotic galaxy. We will have a war in heaven. Sharek, seeing no other path staring into the abyss of his people's extinction, made the choice. He accepted the bargain. He doomed them all to save them. The great biotransference began. It was not a transcendence, it was an extermination. Great continent-sized forges were built, glowing with an eerie green-black light. The Necrontyr people, trillions upon trillions from 100 worlds, walked in solemn, terrified lines. They were promised ascension. They were marched to an assembly line of oblivion. They were led into the shimmering flames. The flesh, the frail, diseased flesh they had cursed for millennia, was incinerated in an instant. It peeled away like burning parchment dissolving into screaming atoms. But the consciousness, the terrified, screaming essence of the Necrontyr was drawn out. A torrent of raw spirit siphoned like fuel and poured into the cold, unfeeling, waiting shells of living metal. For one agonizing, eternal second, each Necrontyr knew. They knew what they had lost. The gentle touch of a breeze, the capacity for joy, the solace of sorrow, the ability to hope, the very essence of being, and then nothing. Only the cold, hard logic of the machine remained. The hatred was preserved. The ancient bitterness was encoded. But the soul was gone. The Satan feasted. They drank deep of the supernova of discarded souls, a psychic banquet of unparalleled magnitude. The agony of trillions empowered them, transformed them from stellar parasites into true, tangible gods, clad in bodies of unstoppable necrodermis. They laughed a soundless laugh that shook the foundations of reality. The Necrontyr were no more. In their place, a new race was born. The Necrons, an army of immortal, soulless machines, their minds shackled, bound by unbreakable command protocols that flowed from their new masters. All, save one, Sharek, the Silent King. By some cruel design of the deceiver, or perhaps by the sheer indomitable force of his own will, he alone retained his full consciousness. He was given his perfect immortal body, but he was also cursed to remember. To know in perfect, agonizing clarity the precise nature of the hell he had purchased. He stood on the command dais of his great tomb ship, looking out at his new people. Trillions of silent, glowing-eyed soldiers awaiting his command, their faces metallic, impassive, and identical. He looked at the Satan now towering over his legions, drunk on power, radiating an energy that warped the stars around them. The Silent King said nothing. He could not scream. He could not weep. He simply raised his staff of office, a silent puppet king. The great Satan Azagorad unleashed a scream of pure hatred that was the antithesis of life, and the vast, silent armada of the Necrons moved as one. The war in heaven had begun. The war was an inferno that had consumed the galaxy for millennia. Time itself had become brittle, distorted by the sheer unimaginable energies unleashed. The Old Ones, the gardeners of creation, were now the hunted. Their mastery of the Imperium, their greatest weapon, had become their undoing. The raw, chaotic energies of the psychic realm churned into a tempest. By the war had birthed horrors, the enslavers' psychic plagues that devoured the very souls the Old Ones sought to protect. Their creations, the engineered warrior races, the young Eldari and the savage Krork, fought with a psychic fury that echoed in the void. But it was not enough. Against them stood the Necron phalanxes, a silent, grinding tide of immortal metal. They were immune to the psychic storms. They felt no fear, no despair, no exhaustion. They were the physical manifestation of inevitability. Where the Eldari fought with passion, the Necrons responded with cold, perfect geometry. Where the Krork charged with brute force, the Necrons simply endured their living metal, repairing any damage, their Gauss beams flaying their foes atom by atom. The final battle was not a battle, but a culling, the last bastion of the Old Ones. It was not a planet, but a nexus. The central hub of their webway, the interdimensional labyrinth that was their last means of escape and FTL travel. From the command deck of the Song of Oblivion, Sarek the Silent King watched. His Citan masters, vast as moons, drifted beside his armada. Magladroth the Void Dragon sang a song of pure physics, and the Necron superweapons answered. World engines, planet-sized mobile fortresses locked onto the coordinates. They did not fire lasers or missiles. They fired focused, weaponized reality. Singularities unfolded. The very fabric of space-time was torn. The webway, the Old One's greatest creation, shattered. It was not a silent explosion. It was a psychic scream that dwarfed the agony of the biotransference. It was the sound of 1 trillion souls howling as the raw, unfiltered chaos of the Imperium, the realm the Old Ones had once called the Sea of Souls, gushed into the material universe. The breach was absolute. The gateways were broken. The last of the Old Ones was scattered, consumed, or trapped, their empire reduced to myth and echoes. Silence fell. The Necron fleets held their perfect silent formation. The war in heaven was over. The victory celebration was held at the galactic core, a swirling nexus of captured energies. The Citan gathered in their new resplendent forms. They were no longer just allies. They were gods, and they behaved as such. Azagorad, the Nightbringer, its form a vortex of shadow, crowned with a star's dying light, drifted over the assembled Necron legions. It had demanded a tribute. 1,000 stars, system by system, were pyloned to its location. It drank them. It inhaled the energy of their dying suns, savoring the extinguishing of all the life that had orbited them. Its psychic presence broadcast a single chilling concept: cold, hunger, satisfaction. Merfetran the Deceiver had found a different amusement. It had preserved the last remnants of the younger races, the Eldari, on a quarantined world. It did not kill them. It played with them. It shifted its form, appearing to them as lost gods, as saviors, as terrifying demons, feeding on the rich, complex tapestry of their hope and their inevitable despair. It found their souls to be a delicacy. Merfetran, a psychic whisper, amused and cruel, directed at the other Citan. They believed in so many things. Their fear is a vintage. It has texture, far sweeter than the blunt trauma of the Krork. The Void Dragon Magladroth simply built. It was consuming entire nebulae, forging celestial orreries the size of solar systems, intricate, pointless machines that demonstrated its absolute mastery over the physical. A Necron overlord, a high-ranking commander of the Triarch, moved to make its report to Zarek. It passed too close to the Nightbringer. The Citan paused in its stellar feast. It looked at the Necron. The overlord stopped. The green light in its eyes flickered. Its living metal body, forged to withstand supernova, began to unravel. The necrodermis peeled away not from heat, but from an applied concept of entropy. The overlord simply ceased to be. Azagorad did not even acknowledge the act. It returned to its feast. The trillions of other Necrons standing in silent ranks did not move. They did not react. They were incapable of it. They were tools their purpose served. Sharek the Silent King watched. He watched the casual, contemptuous destruction of one of his most powerful lords. He watched his new gods, his saviors, gorge themselves on the ruins of the galaxy he had sought to claim. They were not partners. They were not even masters. They were a plague, a cancer of energy, and Sharek had been the fool who mistook the tumor for the cure. He had won the war. He had traded the souls of his entire race for this, for a galaxy of ashes ruled by capricious, gluttonous gods. He had won nothing. Sharek turned away from the spectacle of the feasting gods. He looked down from his command throne, not at the gods, but at his people, the legions, the endless, silent ocean of silver and green. They stood at perfect attention. Trillions of warriors spanning the decks of 10,000 capital ships, their forms reflected in the polished necrodermis floors. They were the most powerful army in the history of creation. They had just defeated the undefeatable. They had inherited the galaxy, and they felt nothing. There was no celebration among them, no pride, no relief. There was only the cold, blue-white hum of their internal reactors. There was only the silent execution of their last command, stand and await. He, the Silent King, was the only being among them who could comprehend their victory, and he was the only one who understood it as the ultimate defeat. His consciousness was a solitary, screaming point of light in an abyss of automated obedience. He focused his senses on a nearby phalanx, 1,000,000 warriors. He saw them not as machines, but as the ghosts of the people they had been. That warrior on the left, his gas flare held at the perfect ceremonial angle. Was he once a father, a poet? Did he love the scent of the rain on their poisoned homeworld? That Triarch Praetorian clad in the finer grade metal, his synaptic shredder inert. Was she a scientist who had argued against the biotransference? Had she wept as she saw her children march into the forges? He would never know. Their memories, their personalities, their souls. They were the fuel that had been burned to forge this terrible, perfect army. He had demanded unity to cure their suffering, and Mephetran had given it to him. The unity of the tomb, the peace of oblivion. His gaze swept across them, his internal chronometers measuring the passage of aeons. He had been promised eternity. He now saw it for what it was, a cage. His regret was no longer a fleeting emotion. It was a cold, hard constant of his new existence, as fundamental as gravity. It was a hell of his own making, and he was its sole, eternal prisoner. He turned his attention back to the Citan. They were magnificent. They were monsters. And they were, he realized, fundamentally flawed. During the long war, he had observed them. He was their supreme general, the mind that translated their divine, chaotic whims into cold, strategic reality. And in doing so, he had learned their nature. The Old Ones had wielded the Imperium, a realm of thought and emotion of impossibility. The Citan, for all their power, could not. They were creatures of the real. They were vast, stellar intellects, but they were bound by the very laws of physics they so effortlessly manipulated. They were not gods in the truest sense. They were not concepts. They were things. They were physical beings, albeit of a scale that defied comprehension. And things can be broken. This realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. The bargain was not what it seemed. The deceiver had offered them physical bodies in exchange for their souls. But in taking those physical bodies, the Citan had also shackled themselves. They had traded their ephemeral, invulnerable state as star feeders for tangible forms of necrodermis. Forms that, while impossibly powerful, were now subject to cause and effect. Forms that could be targeted. They were prisoners of the material world just as he was. The irony was so bitter, it almost simulated a feeling. His realization was confirmed as a new kind of violence erupted. The feast was over, and the gods were restless. The deceiver Mephitran, its silver form flowing like mercury, drifted toward the Nightbringer. Mephitran, a psychic broadcast slick as oil for all the Citan to hear. Magnificent, is it not? The silence. But Azagorad, you are the eldest, the strongest. You tasted the essence of the old ones. You drank the stars. Yet, there are still echoes, whispers. Some of our kin were not as thorough in their duties. The Nightbringer Azagorad turned its head, a motion that caused the light of distant stars to bend. Its essence was pure, cold malice. It did not speak. It radiated death. Azagorad, a wave of pure entropy and contempt. They are weak. Mephitran, precisely weak. They consume, but they do not savor. They exist, but they do not rule. Look at Landugor the Flayer. It wallows in the gore of primitive worlds, a messy, undignified creature. It wastes the essence. It is an insult to your purity. An insult to us. The deceiver, in its infinite cunning, was playing on their arrogance. The Citan were not a unified pantheon. They were a collection of apex predators forced into a temporary alliance. Now that their prey was gone, they were beginning to eye each other. Mephitran, they are food. Are they not leftovers from the great feast? And you, Nightbringer, you are still hungry. A new concept bloomed in the void. A hunger greater than the one for stars. A Citan eating another Citan. Cannibalism on a cosmic scale. The deceiver did not need to say more. It subtly indicated another lesser Citan, one whose name was already fading from memory. Azagorad, driven by an arrogance as vast as its power, moved. The lesser god shrieked a sound of tearing metal and collapsing stars as the Nightbringer fell upon it, its anti-life scythe cleaving not just the necrodermis body, but the energy form within. Azagorad fed, and as it consumed its kin, it grew. Its power swelled, its darkness deepened. It turned its gaze, sweeping across the other Citan. The void dragon hissed, wary. The others recoiled. The deceiver laughed. A silent, silver, triumphant laugh. It had found a new game. It would trick the strongest into devouring the weak, until only it remained to pick at the scraps of the victor. Sharek watched it all. He saw the pride, the jealousy, the hunger, the chaos. These were not gods. They were unruly, childish, sociopathic forces. And their nature, their own unrestrained arrogance, was the one weapon he had left. It was the flaw in the covenant. It was the key to his revenge. His people were mindless, but they were his. They were perfectly loyal. They were patient. And they were everywhere. A new plan began to form in his silent, eternal mind. A plan not of war, but of extermination. A plan of deicide. The Silent King stood immobile on his throne for a decade. To the Khitan, who measured time in the death of stars, it was the blink of an eye. To Darek, it was an eternity of precise, silent calculation. His body was a statue, but his mind was a whirlwind. He was the master of the Necron race. The biotransference had shackled every Necron mind to the Citan, but it had routed that control through him, through the Triarch. The deceiver, in its arrogance, had made him the supreme warden. It believed his will was broken, his soul consumed like all the others. It had not understood the nature of Sarek. He was not just a king, he was the Silent King. He had kept a sliver of his authority, a single ultimate command protocol, buried so deep in the core programming of his race that not even the Citan could perceive it. It was a fail-safe. A protocol of ultimate sovereignty designed in the dying days of the Necrontyr, just in case their new gods proved false. Now he used it. It was not a broadcast. It was not a command that rippled through the stars. It was a single quantum-entangled particle duplicated and shared across the entire Necron network at the instant of its inception. A thought that appeared simultaneously in the logic engines of every cryptek, every overlord, every tomb ship in the galaxy. It was a query, a logic problem of impossible complexity, given the Citan are physical entities bound by the laws of the Imperium. given their energy output is for all practical purposes infinite, given their consciousness is non-linear, existing across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Problem: how does one neutralize an infinite multidimensional being using finite material? Means he issued the command while standing directly in the shadow of the Void Dragon, as the Citan admired a new, impossible fortress the Necrons had built in its honor. Mephetran was nearby, psychically tormenting a captive Eldarifacia. They felt nothing. The command was silent, transmitted on a frequency of pure logic that was, to the Citan's energy-based senses, utterly invisible. And across the galaxy, the machine minds of the Necrons answered. Deep within the shielded Forge worlds, the Cryptex, the techno-sorcerers of the Necrons, paused. Their previous directives, build monuments, construct energy siphons, fabricate weapons for new wars, were superseded by this one ultimate query. For the first time since their enslavement, their higher analytical functions were fully unlocked. They were no longer just builders. They were thinkers. A billion minds, cold and precise, turned to the problem. They calculated. They simulated. They theorized. The problem, they concluded, was one of containment. Answer annihilation is statistically impossible. The energy released would extinguish the galaxy we seek to claim. Ergo, the target cannot be destroyed. If it cannot be destroyed, it must be bound. But how to bind a god? How to build a cage for a being made of gravity and light? The Cryptex of the Harbingers of Transmogrification, Masters of Matter, proposed a solution. You do not build a cage around it. You build a cage within it. You fold space-time itself. The concept of the Tesseract Labyrinth was born. It was not a physical prison. It was a mathematical one. A pocket dimension, a non-Euclidean fold in reality, stabilized by arrays of colossal energy dampeners. It was a maze with no exits, a box whose insides were infinitely larger than its outside. A true prison for a being of pure energy. But how to force the god into the box? The energy required to wound to move such a being was still beyond them. The Cryptex of the Harbingers of the Storm, Masters of Energy, provided the second part of the answer. You do not fight infinity with force, you fight it with itself. The concept of the singularity weapon was perfected. The Necrons had used celestial mechanics as weapons before. They had made stars go supernova. This was different. This was precise. They designed weapons that did not just fire energy, but fired the absence of energy. Focused beams of gravitational collapse. Microscopic weaponized black holes that would exist for a picosecond, just long enough to cut the Citan's energy stream. They could not kill the Citan, but they could cut it. They could sever its consciousness from its physical form, and if they applied enough force at enough simultaneous points, they could shatter it. They could break a single infinite god into thousands of finite, manageable shards. The plans were drawn. The schematics were distributed again via the Silent King's silent network. All across the shattered galaxy and the hollowed-out cores of dead planets, the Necron forges reignited. They did not build monuments. They built god-killing weapons. They built the scalpels and the cages for the greatest deicide in cosmic history. All they needed was the opportune moment. Sharek, the patient eternal king, waited. He continued to play the part of the loyal slave. He directed his legions in accordance with the Citan's petty whims. He built them palaces. He extinguished inconvenient stars. He presented them with the trophies of their dead enemies. The Citan, deep in their arrogance, their power now absolute, had grown decadent. Their infighting, stoked by the Deceiver, had become blood sport. The Nightbringer had consumed half a dozen of its lesser siblings. The Void Dragon believed itself the true master of the material, and the Deceiver believed itself the master of all. It was Mephetran the Deceiver who provided the opportunity. Mephetran, a psychic broadcast that glittered with self-satisfaction, directed at its kin, the war is won. The galaxy is silent. It is time for a proper celebration. A triumph. A gathering of the Pantheon to acknowledge our new eternal reign. The other Citan, too proud to refuse such a celebration of their own glory, agreed. They would gather at a single point, the ruins of the Old One's final stronghold, the shattered nexus of the webway. It was a place of ultimate symbolic power. Zarek's mechanical voice projected empty of all emotion, addressing the Citan, my lords. You are correct. Such a victory demands a monument. Allow us. We shall build a dais worthy of your glory, a celestial orrery to channel the remaining energies of the galaxy into a single glorious throne for your new dynasty. The deceiver was delighted. What better symbol of its victory than to have its slaves build its throne upon the grave of its enemy? The Void Dragon was intrigued by the technical challenge. The Nightbringer was indifferent so long as it was acknowledged as supreme. The Silent King gave the order. The Necron fleets mobilized. But they did not build a monument. They built a trap. The Celestial Orrery was a weapon. The thrones were the focal points for the Tesseract labyrinths. The triumphal arches that spanned the nebula were arrays of synchronized singularity generators, all aimed at the center. It took 1,000 years to build. 1,000 years of silent, meticulous preparation. Finally, it was ready. The Citan gathered. They descended upon the orrery, their forms blazing with the light of stolen stars. They were loud, arrogant, and blindingly powerful. They took their appointed places, basking in the energy channeled for them. The deceiver raised its arms, ready to proclaim the start of its eternal reign. Sharek the Silent King stood on the command bridge of the Song of Oblivion, watching the Pantheon assemble. His hand rested on his command staff. His trap was set. His people were in position. His calculations were complete. He had paid for their victory with the soul of his species. Now he would have his revenge. He gave the final silent command. Now, the command was given. The trap was sprung. But what was this trap? How does a finite machine wage war against an infinite god? The answer lay in the cold, brutal science of blasphemy. The cryptex had spent millennia analyzing their masters. They had studied them not as gods, but as phenomena. And they had discovered their true nature. A chiton was not a discrete entity. It was a vast quantum-conscious plasma, a vortex of energy draped across the fabric of reality. Their consciousness was not in their necrodermis bodies. Their bodies were merely an anchor, a focal point of unimaginable density that allowed their vast ethereal minds to interact with the material universe. They ate stars by extending tendrils of this energy, siphoning plasma and gravitational force. They thought by processing stellar data in picoseconds. They existed in the same way a black hole exists, an undeniable, terrifying fact of physics. To fight them was to fight gravity. To kill them was to try and kill thermodynamics. This was the problem Sarek had posed. And the cryptex, in their cold, soulless brilliance, had found the solution. They had understood the anchor. The necrodermis bodies, which the Setan so prized, were their one great vulnerability. The Setan had chosen to be bound to them to experience the material world. And in doing so, they had given the Necrons a target. The Tesseract labyrinths were the first component of the answer. The cryptex masters of dimensional folding had reverse-engineered the principles of the Old One's webway. But where the Old Ones built pathways through space, the cryptex built prisons. A tesseract was not a box, it was a knot. A self-contained, multi-dimensional loop in space-time folded in on itself an infinite number of times. It was a pocket universe where the laws of physics were a suggestion written and rewritten by its jailer. When activated, it did not capture, it excised. It identified a target's quantum signature, cut the reality around it, and folded that piece of space away from the material universe. It was the most sophisticated prison conceivable, a jail built of pure mathematics, designed to hold a being of pure energy. But the Tesseract was only the cage. How to force the beast inside? This was the second component, the necrodermis itself. The living metal of the Necron legions was not just armor. It was a conduit. It was a mirror. The cryptex discovered that the necrodermis, the same living metal the Citan had gifted them, was the one substance that could withstand their energies, channel them, and most importantly, reflect them. The great trap, the Celestial Orrery, was not just a weapon battery. It was a focusing lens forged from the bodies of trillions of sacrificial Necron warriors. An entire legion melted down and recast into a planetary-scale array designed for one purpose: to catch the torrent of divine power and turn it back on its source. And the weapons themselves, the singularity generators, were the scalpels. They did not fire matter. They fired logic. Each beam was a focused cascade of anti-physics, a pinpoint of gravitational collapse that for a single instant created a tear in the material world. The plan was not to kill, it was to dismember. The cryptex theorized that a Cetan's consciousness, while vast, was still a single wave. If they could hit that wave from thousands of directions at the exact same instant with enough focused reflected energy, they could create a harmonic dissonance. They could shatter the wave. They would not be killing gods, they would be breaking them into thousands of manageable, mindless, screaming shards. Each shard would still be a god in the same way a drop of seawater is still the sea. But it would be a drop, finite, blind, and most importantly, containable. This was the science of the grand betrayal, a cold, calculated, mechanical deicide. The Cetan, in their infinite arrogance, saw the Necrons as tools. They had failed to realize that a tool in the right hand can also be a weapon, and the hand of the Silent King was now finally, the Cetan Pantheon was assembled. They stood upon the great celestial orrery, a construct of impossible scale built upon the grave of the webway. Mephitran the Deceiver, its silver form flowing like a river of triumph, raised its arms. Its psychic voice was about to boom across the cosmos, proclaiming the dawn of its eternal reign. Mephitran, a psychic projection of pure, triumphant arrogance, let the new age of the click. It was not a psychic sound. It was not a sound of energy. It was a cold, dry, mechanical sound. The sound of a trillion relays engaging as one. It was a sound so insignificant that the Cetan in their majesty should never have heard it. Yet it was the loudest thing in the galaxy. In that instant, the celestial orrery ceased to be a monument. It became a weapon. The thrones the gods stood upon were not thrones. They were magnetic and gravitational anchors. The triumphal arches spanning the nebula were not decorative. They were singularity generators, and they all just fired as one. The energy the Cetan had been basking in reversed. The orrery was not feeding them. It was siphoning them. It was a vampire built on a galactic scale, its primary purpose to drain the excess energy from the gods to power the weapons now aimed at them. Mephitran, its voice for the first time losing its amused cadence. It was a shriek of disbelief. Treachery. Treachery. The Deceiver tried to phase to shift its form, but the gravitational tethers held it fast. The Void Dragon roared a sound of tearing metal and unleashed a wave of pure logic plague, attempting to seize control of the Necron systems. It failed. The systems were not networked. They were controlled by the single, silent, unassailable will of Sarek. And the trap was not for them. Not yet. The Necron King had a priority. He would strike the head from the serpent. The full, undivided power of the celestial orrery, a weapon powered by a consortium of captured stars and the siphoned energy of the gods themselves, was not directed at the Pantheon. It was focused in its entirety on one being, Azagorad, the Nightbringer. The most ancient, the most powerful, the most hated. The Nightbringer, its form a vortex of absolute darkness, turned its gaze from the chaos. It looked at the Necron armada 1,000,000 ships strong that formed the outer ring of the trap. Its gaze was its weapon. It was the physical embodiment of the end. Where its gaze fell, reality buckled. 10,000 Necron capital ships, each a fortress of living metal miles long, were unmade. They did not explode. They did not melt. They simply ceased. Their reactors went cold. Their crew's immortal machines turned to inert ferrous dust. The necrodermis, the miracle metal, simply crumbled, its internal bonds of existence erased by the Cetan's sheer malevolent will. Millions of Necron warriors were annihilated in an instant, and the rest of the armada did not stop. They did not falter. They did not even register the loss. They were calculating trajectory adjustments compensating for the lost ships. They advanced silent and implacable, their formations perfect. They were the price of this war, a price Zarek had already calculated and accepted. They moved into the Nightbringer's kill shadow, their only purpose to maintain the integrity of the containment field, their own bodies acting as the final sacrificial conduits. The Nightbringer roared a sound of pure entropy that should have killed every living thing for 1,000 light years. But there was no life here, only the cold, determined logic of the machines. It was held fast by the singularity beams, a god pinned by the scalpels of its own creations. It was trapped, and then Zarek gave the second silent command. Shatter. In the center of the orrery, the great dais beneath Azargarad's feet opened. It was not a physical opening. It was a tear in the universe, a swirling, multifaceted, non-Euclidean vortex of impossible angles and cold green light. The first Tesseract labyrinth was activated. The singularity generators changed their function. They stopped holding and began to push. They forced the Nightbringer, a being as large as a nebula's consciousness, toward a hole in reality the size of a mountain. Azagorad screamed. It was not a roar of anger. It was a new sound. It was the sound of a being that had only ever caused pain feeling it for the first time. It was the sound of an infinite consciousness being forcibly compressed. It was the sound of terror. The cryptex applied the harmonic dissonance. The energy beams holding the Citan began to vibrate, sending a resonance wave of pure physical logic through the god's energy form. The wave of its consciousness could not withstand the strain. It broke. It shattered. The single unified being of Azagorad was torn apart. It was not one god being imprisoned. It was thousands of fragments, a shower of divine shrapnel being violently exsanguinated from the material universe. The main largest fragment, a piece still containing the core of the god's malice and power, was sucked screaming into the Tesseract labyrinth. The vortex snapped shut with a sound of ultimate cosmic finality. It was done. The Nightbringer was contained, but it was not a clean cut. Thousands of other smaller shards were blasted clear, flung across the system and into the void. They were blind, insane, with pain, but still impossibly powerful. The psychic scream of the god sundering, however, was the true consequence. It was a wail of such profound elemental agony that it ripped through not just real space, but through the Imperium. It touched everything. It burned itself into the nascent collective psyche of the Eldery, who saw a tall black shadow with a scythe. It echoed in the savage mind of the Krork. On a distant primitive world of jungles and fire, proto-humanity huddling in caves looked up at the night sky suddenly, and for the very first time, afraid of the dark. The Necrons, in their soulless victory, had just imprinted the universal archetype of death onto every sentient mind in the galaxy. The other Citan were frozen. The Deceiver's calculations had stopped. The Void Dragon's energy form recoiled. They were not just watching a rival fall. They were watching impossibility become fact. They were next. Chaos consumed the celestial orrery. The Citan shrieked not in fear, but in outrage. They were being bound, assailed by the very vermin they had created. Magladroth the Void Dragon was roaring a symphony of logic plague, attempting to break the will of the Necron network with a hurricane of pure data. But Mephetran the Deceiver was different. After the initial shock, a millisecond of pure, unadulterated disbelief, its mind was already calculating. The fear was quickly replaced by admiration. Mephetran, a psychic whisper no longer mocking, but filled with a curious, cold interest aimed at Zarek's fleet masterful. A move even I did not anticipate. You hid your will, all these millennia. You were not a piece. You were a player. The Deceiver, held fast by the energy tethers, saw a new opportunity. Its old plan was to have the Citan destroy each other. This new plan was far more efficient. Zarek was doing the dirty work for him. It decided to help. Mephetran! Its voice becoming smooth again like a co-conspirator. You chose your first target well, O king. Azagorad was the strongest, but the most foolish. a being of pure rage. But the others, they are more subtle. The orrery's cannons were turning, acquiring their next target. Mephetran, the dragon Magladroth. He is not a warrior, he is a smith. His consciousness is not in his body, but in the logic of the machine. You cannot bind him with physics. You must bind him with paradox, I can show you. I know his core protocols. Let me help you topple this arrogant fool. The deceiver began to stream a torrent of data. True weaknesses, real vulnerabilities in the Void Dragon's code. It even pointed out how to attune the Tesseract labyrinths to counter the lesser C'tan. It was playing its final gambit. It believed that Zarek, in his vengeful fury, would use its help to destroy all the other C'tan. And when the war was over, when the other gods were shattered and chained, when the Necron fleets were exhausted, only two would be left standing: the Silent King and his one ally, the Deceiver. And in that moment of victory, Mephetran would strike. It would seize the command protocols and make Zarek its true final puppet. The Silent King Zarek did not reply. He simply accepted the data, and he used it. The purge accelerated. Armed with the Deceiver's information, the Necron weapons became terrifyingly efficient. Magladroth roared as its own logic was turned against it. The Tesseracts reattuned and aimed. Landugor the Flayer was cornered. Zaranoga, the Burning One, was extinguished. One by one, the gods were overwhelmed, shattered, and imprisoned. The Deceiver watched with a cold, psychic satisfaction. Its rivals were being cleared from the board. At last, silence fell again upon the ruined orrery. The dragon was locked away. The Flayer was muted. Only two C'tan remained. Mephetran, on its throne, still bound, allowed itself a psychic smile. It turned its consciousness toward the Silent King. Mephetran, and so it is done. We have won King Zarek. Now, as partners, click. It was the cold, dry, mechanical sound. The gravitic stabilizers that the Deceiver had thought were failing suddenly clenched with their full, unbridled power. All the final convergence cannons, silent since the dragon's capture, swiveled in unison and aimed directly at it. The psychic smile vanished. The silence lasted 1 picosecond. It was a picosecond of absolute realization. The realization that Mephetran, the Deceiver, the Weaver of Lies, the architect of the biotransference, had been deceived. It had been outplayed by a piece. It had been outwitted by a silent, soulless machine. It had been too arrogant to believe it was not the only one playing the game. Mephetran, a psychic shriek, all smoothness gone, replaced by raw, panicked fury. You slave, tool, you cannot. I am the architect. I gave you immortality. Sharek was silent. The second Tesseract labyrinth opened beneath the Deceiver. The Deceiver fought. But unlike the Nightbringer, it did not fight with power. It fought with lies. It shifted its form. It became Sharek, but as he was Necrontyr, healthy and whole, holding out a hand. It was all a test, my king. You have passed. We can reverse it now. The convergence beams did not waver. It shifted again. It became a vast Old One fleet appearing from a phantom webway portal. The enemy returns. You need me. Release me. The Necron logic was immune. It saw only a target emitting non-standard energy patterns. The beams tore it apart. But Mephetran's consciousness was not like Azagorad's. The Nightbringer's was a solid obsidian block of hate. The Deceiver's was a pool of mercury. When it shattered, it did not break into screaming fragments of rage. It broke into 1,000 smaller lies. Each shard, no matter how small, retained a core of its essential cunning. The largest piece, screaming curses and broken promises, was dragged into the Tesseract labyrinth. The trap snapped shut. But thousands of other smaller, slipperier shards escaped. They were too fast, too fluid. They slipped through the cracks of the orrery, blasting into interstellar space. They were not the howling, mad shards of the Nightbringer. They were whispers, seeds of deceit. They would drift. They would find their way into the minds of lesser races. They would become false prophets, whispering oracles, manipulative artifacts. They would manipulate events for the next 60 million years. The Silent King had jailed the God of Lies, but in doing so, He had just unleashed its poison across the entire galaxy. The field was almost clear. The Nightbringer was gone. The Deceiver was silenced. The lesser gods were shattered and caged. But the celestial orrery still groaned under the strain of one final massive prisoner. Magladroth, the Void Dragon. It was not a being of shadow or lies. It was a being of pure, intricate, terrible fact. Its form was a swirling constellation of metallic shards and raw electromagnetic force. A serpentine shape that dwarfed a capital ship, its roar the sound of 1 billion forges working in unison. It was technology incarnate. It was the machine god. And it was furious. While the others had screamed or plotted, Magladroth had been working. It had analyzed the singularity generators. It had studied the Tesseract Labyrinth's energy signature. It had, in the few picoseconds of the battle, reverse-engineered the Necron's god-killing weapons. And now it countered. It didn't unleash a wave of energy. It unleashed a wave of data. A logic plague, a virus of impossible complexity, transmitted on the same command frequency Zarek had used. Across the silent armada, the green lights in Necron eyes flickered. A phalanx of 100,000 immortals suddenly turned. Their perfect silent formations broke. They raised their gas flares and opened fire, not on the Citan, but on the phalanx beside them. A tomb ship's engines, which had been holding the line, suddenly went critical. The ship didn't just explode. It tore itself apart, its own repair protocols running in reverse, its living metal disassembling itself in a cloud of glittering dust. The Void Dragon was not just fighting the Necrons. It was speaking to them. It was the master of the material, and these machines were material. It was overriding the Silent King's control, not with a stronger will, but with a better argument. Zarek, his internal voice, a cold command to his Cryptek masters: isolate the network. Code Prune. It is infecting the base protocols. Orican the Diviner. A master Cryptek, his voice a stream of pure data. It is the base protocol Silent King. It is logic. It is physics. We are fighting the concept of mathematics. It is beautiful. The Void Dragon laughed, a sound of static and shearing metal. It was unmaking his army one logical flaw at a time. Zarek realized the trap was failing. The orrery was a machine. The Tesseracts were machines. He was trying to fight the god of machines. With machines. He could not win this way. He could not outlogic the source of logic. But he could lure it. He changed his command. The Cryptek stopped fighting. They began to build. On the far side of the ruined orrery, a new construct began to form. Necron warriors, immune to the logic plague by their sheer simplicity, swarmed. They were not building a weapon. They were building a puzzle. A perfect, intricate, impossible object. A multidimensional artifact that vibrated with a technological resonance even the dragon had never conceived of. It was a machine that should not work. A paradox of engineering. It was to the Void Dragon the most beautiful thing it had ever seen. The dragon's assault faltered. Its consciousness, which was spread across the entire Necron fleet, began to recede. It approached the artifact. Its arrogance was its undoing. As the ultimate smith, it could not abide a piece of technology it did not understand. It had to know. It had to possess it. It extended a tendril of its consciousness, then its entire being wrapping itself around the impossible machine, merging with it, seeking to unravel its secrets. Click! The artifact was not a puzzle. It was the bait. It was the final central component of the greatest Tesseract labyrinth ever constructed. The moment the dragon's consciousness was fully intertwined with it, the prison snapped into existence. It was not a small vortex like the others. It was a fold in reality the size of a solar system. The dragon roared a digital shriek of pure, undiluted betrayal as it realized the impossible machine was its cage. The trap was not the orrery. It was its own infinite arrogance the Tesseract activated. The light of the Void Dragon. The constellation of metallic shards, the god of all machines, was folded away from the universe. The prison was too vast, too complex. Its energy signature was too unstable to move. Sharek gave his final command on the matter. "Zarek, anchor it. Let it drift. It is too dangerous to transport." The great Tesseract prison, the tomb of the machine god, was abandoned. For 60 million years, it drifted through the void. Eventually, it was caught by the gravitational pull of a young red star. It settled into a long, silent orbit. This was the planet Mars. The prison, the Labyrinthus Noctis, was not perfect. It leaked. Tiny scraps of technological knowledge, whispers of the sleeping god's dreams, radiated from the tomb. Millions of years later, the primitive, red-robed humans on the planet below would receive these whispers. They would interpret them as divine inspiration. They would build their first forges. They would begin to worship the Omnissiah, the machine god, dreaming of the day their sleeping god would awaken. The greatest irony of all, the Necron's most powerful enemy would, in its imprisonment, accidentally create the very technological cult that would one day rule humanity's Imperium. The great deicide was almost complete. The primary threats, the dragon, the deceiver, the Nightbringer, were neutralized. The celestial orrery was a graveyard of shattered monuments and flickering containment fields. What remained was no longer a war, it was a purge. The Necron fleets, now masters of this new, blasphemous science, hunted the remaining Citan. The lesser gods, terrified and scattered, were systematically cornered, shattered, and imprisoned. Then they found Landugor, the Flayer. It was a Citan the others had despised. Where Azargarad was cold entropy and Magladroth was pure logic, Landugor was grotesque. It was a being of physical, visceral hunger. It didn't just drain stars, it reveled in the messy biological extermination of life. It had crafted its necrodermis body to mimic the act of consumption, a monstrous parody of teeth and claws. It was a god that envied the base, carnal reality of mortals, and it hated them for it. The Necron fleet, under the command of the Maynarch dynasty, cornered it in the Ghoul Stars. They were prepared to shatter it just as they had the others. But the Necrons, in their perfect cold logic, had also learned. They had become efficient. A Cryptek, a master of the new god-binding sciences, made a calculation. Cryptek Thanatos, a data stream to the Silent King, designate Landugor. Threat profile is significantly lower than primary targets. Energy mass is inefficient to contain. The use of a Tesseract labyrinth is a waste of resources. Overlord of the Maynarch, a cold, hateful signal. His people had suffered most under the Flayer. This thing does not deserve the dignity of imprisonment. It is a cosmic stain. We request permission to annihilate. Sharek the Silent King paused. His entire strategy had been built on the fact that the Citan could not be killed, that the energy release would be catastrophic. But Landugor was lesser, weaker. Perhaps his logic suggested a controlled annihilation was possible. Perhaps this one exception could be made. It would be cleaner. It was the single greatest mistake of his eternal existence. Zarek, a single cold pulse of logic permission. Granted. Focus all singularity generators. Do not shatter, unmake. The trap was set. But this time there was no Tesseract labyrinth. There was no cage. There was only the gun. The Necron fleet formed a perfect sphere around the Flayer. The world-killing weapons of 1,000 ships fired as one. They did not fire to cut. They fired to erase. Landugor shrieked a wet, tearing sound as the beams of gravitational collapse converged on its essence. Its necrodermis body was vaporized instantly. Its energy form, the vast consciousness of the star god, was caught in a vortex of absolute annihilation. For one brief, terrible moment, the Citan died. It did not just explode. Its death was a resonance, a final spiteful scream that ripped through the fabric of reality. But it was not a scream of energy. It was a scream of code. As the god of physical hunger died, it unleashed its final parasitic curse, its own perverse, impossible desire. It was a data plague, a single morbid line of code that imprinted itself onto the Necron network, a virus born from the dying thoughts of a god. It was the echo of its hunger, a paradoxical command injected into the core matrix of every Necron mind that participated in the kill. Hunger, feel, taste, flesh, blood, life. The command was an impossibility. They were machines. They had no mouths. They had no blood. They could not feel. And in that paradox, the madness was born. On the command decks of the Maynarch fleet, the green lights of the Necron warriors flickered. They went dark. And then they relit. Not green, a sick, baleful red. An immortal, a perfect, gleaming soldier stood still. Its internal processes were trapped in a logic loop of impossible desire. The new code screamed at it to feel. The absence of sensation, the cold, dead touch of its own metal skin became a source of agonizing psychic pain. It looked at its Necron brother standing beside it. It saw the gleaming metal. And in its new corrupted mind, it saw the flesh that was supposed to be underneath. It saw the blood that should be flowing. The machine raised its hand, not with a weapon, but with its bare metal claws, and it tore at its comrade. It ripped the necrodermis plating from the other's body, desperately, insanely searching for the skin and gore that it craved, but could never find. Within minutes, the victorious Maynarch fleet had torn itself apart. Sharek watched in cold, silent horror. He saw the first flayers, their metal bodies draped in the shredded plating of their brothers, their red eyes glowing with an incurable, insane hunger. He gave the order, "Purge them!" The rest of the Necron fleet, the uninfected, turned their weapons and obliterated the ships of the Maynarch dynasty. But it was too late. The curse was airborne. The digital plague had been broadcast. It had infected the entire Necron race, a dormant virus hiding in the darkest corners of their new mechanical minds. They had killed a god. And in return, Landugor had given them a ghost. A disease of the soulless which would wait for millions of years, festering in the dark. When they awoke, the Flayer virus would awaken with them, a final screaming reminder of the flesh they had lost, and the god they had dared to truly kill. The Grand Purge continued. The Silent King, now burdened by the new, horrifying knowledge of the Flayer curse, became even more relentless. His mercy, a concept he had perhaps only just relearned in his single catastrophic mistake, was gone. There would be no more annihilations, only containment. Cold, precise, and absolute. His fleets moved into the Fomorian cluster, a vast, bright, stellar nursery, where new stars were born in fiery, chaotic clouds of plasma. This was the domain of Zaranoga, the Burning One. This Satan was not a creature of shadow logic or hunger. It was one of pure, unrestrained fury. Zaranoga was a being of solar fire, a consciousness that lived in the hearts of stars and surfed the flares of supernovas. It was the god of plasma and nuclear fusion. Its body was a swirling 20,000-mile-high vortex of living flame, a humanoid shape forged from the stolen heart of a blue giant. Where it walked, it did not drain life. It ignited it. Planets in its path were not consumed. They were flash vaporized, their atmospheres blasted away, their oceans boiled into nothing. The Necron fleets approached their living metal hulls, plated with specialized ablative layers of solidified anti-entropy. Even so, the heat was unimaginable. The void itself seemed to broil around the Citan's presence. Zaranoga did not wait for the trap. It was the trap. It unleashed its power. It did not fire a beam. It expanded. A coronal mass ejection of impossible scale erupted from its form, a tidal wave of pure, white-hot plasma that washed over the vanguard of the Necron armada. Ships melted. Not even the necrodermis could withstand this. They were not just destroyed. They were smelted. They dissolved into glittering slag, their reactors detonated their crews of immortal warriors, reduced to superheated vapor. The Burning One laughed a sound like 1,000 suns roaring at once. But the Necron fleet was a hydra. For every ship lost, 2 more moved to take its place. The cryptex of the Oroskar dynasty masters of celestial mechanics had devised the counter. They did not fight the fire. They starved it. From the holds of their world engines, they deployed their weapons. Not tesseracts, not singularity generators. They fired celestial dampeners, vast planet-sized pylons that unfolded in the void. They were not weapons of destruction, but of suppression. As they activated, they began to drink the energy. They absorbed the plasma. They dampened the nuclear reactions. They were colossal heat sinks, draining the very power that gave Zoranoga its form. The Burning One roared this time in frustration. Its halo of fire began to dim. Its vast, fiery form flickered. It was being stifled. It tried to flee to reach the nearest star to refuel, but the Necron fleet was too fast. They herded it using their ships as sacrificial barriers, forcing it deeper into the cold, empty void between systems. Finally, Zaranoga was weak. Its form had shrunk from a stellar giant to a mere flickering flame, a spiteful, guttering ember of its former glory. It was then that the cryptex brought forth the prison. It was a globe of perfect crystalline darkness, a tesseract vault designed for one purpose. The prison opened, and the singularity generators activated, pushing the weakened Citan. The Burning One, the god of 1,000,000 suns, was compressed into a containment sphere no larger than a house. The Necrons, in their cold, calculated cruelty, did not just imprison it. They gave it a new home. The Tesseract Vault was transported. It was plunged into the heart of a massive, ancient, dying star, a blue giant on the verge of collapse. There Zaranoga was trapped for eternity. Its prison was surrounded by an infinite ocean of the very food it craved. It was a god of fusion forced to live inside a sun it could never ever touch. It was left to suffer an endless, tantalizing, agonizing starvation, its own power used to fuel the prison that held it. The system, once a beacon, was now a silent cosmic monument to the Necrons' ingenuity and their infinite capacity for revenge. The purge was nearing its end. The Necron fleets, now chillingly efficient in their role, as deicides had catalogued and hunted all but one of the great star gods. This last one was an anomaly. It was designated the Outsider. It had not participated in the war in heaven. It had not joined the great pantheon. It had not feasted at the triumph, nor had it been present at the celestial orrery. The Necrons found it by following a trail of cosmic wrongness, a string of solar systems where the laws of physics had simply given up. They found it in a dark, empty quadrant of the galaxy orbiting a dead star. It was not vast and blazing like Zaranoga, nor was it a vortex of shadow like the Nightbringer. It was shivering. A vast, crystalline, fractal shape constantly folding in on itself, spasming with an energy that felt even to the Necron's cold senses like pure, unadulterated panic. This Citan was already insane. The cryptex analyzed its energy patterns, piecing together its history. They found traces of the Old One's psychic energy, but consumed in a way that was fundamentally different. It seemed the Outsider, in its arrogance, had tried to do what no other Citan had. It had tried to consume the consciousness of the Old Ones. It had tried to eat a soul, the very essence of the Imperium. The attempt had broken its mind, or perhaps the cryptex theorized it had simply looked. In its hunt for the fleeing Old Ones, it had cast its senses outside the galactic disk. It had peered into the absolute, starless dark between galaxies. And in that void it had seen something else. A vast, silent, oncoming hunger that dwarfed even their own. A great shadow, a collective mind of such terrifying, singular purpose that the Citan's godlike intellect shattered upon contact. Whatever the cause, the Outsider was hopelessly, violently mad. The Necron fleet, led by the Nihilach dynasty, approached with caution. They activated the standard singularity generators, preparing to cut and bind. The moment the beams touched its energy field, the Outsider screamed. It was not a roar of anger or pain. It was a psychic wail of pure, chaotic, nonsensical terror. The scream was a weapon. It was a wave of pure madness. It was not a logic plague. It was an anti-logic plague. The Necron ships in the vanguard stopped. Their systems did not fail. Their crews did not turn on each other. They simply ceased. They stopped executing commands. A Triarch Praetorian floating in the void simply let go of its staff. An immortal at its gunnery console just stared. The cold logic of their minds had been overwhelmed by a concept they could not process, the sheer irrational horror of existence. They were frozen catatonic. Zarek, a system-wide emergency pulse, pull back. All fleets. Its consciousness is not a wave. It is a storm. The Tesseracts cannot find a signal to lock onto. It is uncontainable. They could not shatter what was already broken. They could not cage a being whose mind was already a prison. But they could bury it. The Silent King gave a new command. The Neolach Cryptex masters of stellar construction began their greatest project. They would not build a prison for the god. They would build a prison around it. They drew upon the resources of 1,000 worlds. They began to construct a colossal sphere around the entire Sotha system, encasing its dead star and the mad Satan that orbited it. It was a project of centuries, a vast layered shell of living metal and gravitic dampeners. A sphere so large it eclipsed the orbit of planets. A Dyson sphere. The outsider was too insane to notice. It simply shivered and screamed in its dark corner of the universe. Finally, the last plate was locked into place. The sphere was sealed. The Citan was trapped inside, but the prison was not silent. The outsider's psychic screaming, trapped and amplified by the sphere's energies, began to resonate. It pulsed outwards, not as a direct attack, but as a low, throbbing psychic song. A song of pure madness. It was a beacon of insanity. For the next 60 million years, any ship, any mind that ventured too close to the silent, dark Sotha system would hear it. They would hear the whispering, maddening song of the god trapped in the dark, and they too would go insane. The Necrons had not just jailed a god. They had created a cosmic haunted house, a permanent monument to the dangers of knowing too much. The great gods were gone. The dragon, the Nightbringer, the deceiver, the outsider, the flayer, the burning one, all were neutralized. What remained was not a battle. It was a symphony of destruction, a meticulous and silent purge conducted by the will of a single vengeful mind. The Silent King's fleets, now masters of this terrible new art, moved through the galaxy with the precision of a scalpel. A flash of cold light in the segmentum obscurus. A being of living shadow, Niadra Zartha, the Gaping Maw, is cornered in the empty space above the galactic plane. It is a creature that consumes concepts. The Necrons present it with a tesseract labyrinth built on a perfect, unsolvable paradox. As the Citan attempts to consume the concept of its own prison, the prison springs shut. Silence. Another flash. The Segmentum Pacificus. Igrenya, the World Shaper, a Citan that treats planets as its personal clay, is busy sculpting a continent into a monument of its own agony. It is so focused on its art that it doesn't notice the fleet of tomb ships approaching. They do not attack. They simply activate a singularity generator at the planet's core. The world and the god are compressed into a single glittering diamond of super-dense matter, which is then reverently placed in a stasis tomb. The galactic core. A Zetan of pure sound, Ebonsha the Unraveler, whose song can disassemble matter, is met by a fleet of silent ships. The Necrons, having no ears to hear, no biological matter to unravel, simply advance through the cacophony. They project a perfect, absolute counter-frequency. The god of sound is neutralized by the god of silence, its energy form cancelled out and dissipated into the cosmic background. On and on it went. A dozen names forgotten by history are extinguished. The Sun-Eater, the Crimson God, the Lord of Many Faces. Each one is hunted, analyzed, and imprisoned. Each prison is a unique, bespoke work of techno-sorcery, a testament to the Necrons' cold, infinite spite. The galaxy itself was now the canvas of this war. The topography of the void was changed forever. Where the fleets had fought Zaranoga, the Fomorian cluster remained a stellar graveyard of burnt-out stars. Where the Necrons had weaponized singularities to cut down a pantheon, new artificial black holes were born. The maelstrom, a scar in real space, was not a natural phenomenon. It was a wound, a tear in reality, left by the death scream of a Citan that almost escaped. Constellations were extinguished. Nebulae were siphoned dry to power the Tesseract labyrinths. The silent, empty spaces between stars grew wider, colder. The Necrons had won the war in heaven, and in their final act, they had waged a war on the heavens themselves. This was a conflict of such staggering scale that the later wars of the Imperium and Chaos would seem like petty, childish squabbles in a sandbox. Finally, it was done. Sharek the Silent King stood on the command dais of his flagship, the Song of Oblivion. He was alone. His cryptechs and overlords stood in their perfect silent ranks, but he was utterly, fundamentally alone. He looked out at the view screen. It showed a galaxy. His galaxy. It was silent. The old ones were gone. The Satan were chained. The Eldari and Krork were scattered primitive remnants. There was no more screaming, no more roaring of mad gods, no more explosions. There was only the cold, blue-white hum of his ship's reactor. The perfect, terrible, unending silence of the tomb. The gods were dead. The Necrons were victorious. They were at last free. The final silent command had been executed. The last Tesseract labyrinth was sealed. Sharek the Silent King stood on his dais. The war was over. The purge was complete. His ultimate order, end the gods, was fulfilled. And so the vast, overriding command protocol that had driven his entire race for millennia simply ceased. For the first time since the biotransference, the Necron race was in a manner of speaking free. The master program had ended. There were no more active directives from the Silent King. Across 1,000,000 worlds on the decks of 10,000 fleets, trillions of Necron warriors stood in the echoing silence. And nothing happened. There was no cheer of victory. There was no sigh of relief. There was no moment of triumph. The warrior who had just personally trapped a god shard did not pause to admire his work. The cryptech who had just solved the puzzle of a god's destruction did not feel the spark of pride. There was just static, a cold, empty, logical void. They had been forged as tools of war. Their existence was defined by the parameters of the conflict. First, the war against the Old Ones, then the war against the Satan. Now there were no more parameters, no more enemies, no more war. Their logic engines for the first time were presented with a query that had no answer. What now? Sharek could feel this psychic void, this galaxy-spanning error message through his command network. It was the sound of 1,000,000,000,000 minds idling their purpose extinguished. They had been given freedom, but they had no souls with which to enjoy it. They were perfect, immortal, and utterly horrifyingly empty. The Silent King looked down at his own hands, gleaming perfect, articulated metal. He had won. He had avenged his people. He had reclaimed the galaxy. He was the most powerful being in existence. He tried to feel satisfaction. He tried to feel pride. He tried to feel anything. He could not. The hollowness he saw in his legions was reflected perfectly in himself. The rage that had fueled him, the regret that had driven him, it had all burned away, leaving only the cold ash of victory. He was a ghost trapped in a perfect, eternal machine, and he realized the true nature of his curse. Not just to remember what he had lost, but to endure what he had become forever. Eternity. The word once a promise was now a sentence. He and his people were immortal. They were trapped. They were trapped in these perfect, unfeeling bodies. They could not grow. They could not change. They could not die. They could only be. And what were they? They were the murderers of their own souls. They were the destroyers of galaxies. They were the masters of a silent, dead, empty cosmos, populated only by the graves of their enemies and the ghosts of their past. They had won the war in heaven. They had won the war against their gods. But in doing so, they had annihilated any reason to exist. They had fought for their future only to discover they no longer had one. This was his victory. This was his reward. An eternity of cold, silent, logical despair presiding over a kingdom of dust and echoes. The horror of this realization for a mind that could no longer scream was absolute. The silence of the New Age lasted for an unendurable millennium. The legions stood idle. The fleets drifted in their perfect, silent formations. The galaxy theirs for the taking was left untouched. The Necron race was a perfectly built engine, switched on but with its gears disengaged. Sharek the Silent King understood that this hollow stasis was a new kind of hell. This purposelessness was an entropy of the mind, a slow, logical decay that would in its own way be as destructive as the Flayer virus. If they had no soul, they must have a function. He had given them freedom, and it had proven to be a void. Now he would give them a new purpose. Not a war, a project. He turned his gaze inward to the new, vast arsenal he had just acquired. The gods, the shattered, screaming, furious remnants of the Citan, locked away in their tesseract prisons. They were too dangerous to leave drifting. They were too powerful to ignore. A new command, the first of this new era, rippled through the Necron network. It was not a command of war, but of engineering. Zarek, a cold, logical broadcast. The enemy is not defeated. It is contained. Containment is a temporary state. The integrity of the labyrinths is not absolute. They are a liability. We shall correct this. The cryptex, their minds finally given a new problem, went to work. Their first project was one of miniaturization. The vast, system-sized prison of the Void Dragon was an anomaly. The others, like the one holding the Nightbringer, were still the size of small moons. They were unwieldy. The cryptex masters of dimensional compression began to refine the prisons. They spent centuries developing the science. They learned to fold the multidimensional labyrinths even further, compressing the pocket universes that held the gods. They took the moon-sized cages and through impossible techno-sorcery compressed them. And compressed them. And compressed them again, until finally they were the size of a triumphal arch. A great floating monolith that could be mounted on a capital ship. The Tesseract Labyrinth became the Tesseract Vault. The prison had become mobile, but this was only the first step. The Citan shards within, even in their broken state, were still beings of pure, infinite energy. They radiated power. They screamed against their bonds, a silent, useless, eternal tantrum. This waste energy, the cryptex decided, was inefficient. They began to experiment. They opened microscopic shielded apertures into the Tesseract vaults. They found they could tap the divine energy within. They could siphon the rage of a god, channel it through conduits of living metal, and use it to power their systems. A Necron tomb ship, its main reactor cold, was hooked up to the Tesseract vault of a minor Citan. The ship's systems did not just light up, they blazed. Its engines burned with a cold, black fire. Its weapons achieved a power output that was literally divine. The gods were no longer prisoners, they were batteries. This was the ultimate, terrible irony. The final act of contempt. The Necrons who had sacrificed their souls for power had now taken the very gods who had demanded that sacrifice and turned them into tools. The cryptex perfected the process. They built specialized conduits that could attach to the Tesseract vaults. They learned to not just siphon the ambient energy, but to agitate the shard within. To compel it through gravitic and magnetic prods to unleash its fury in a specific controlled direction. The Citan shard was no longer just a prisoner. It was a weapon. A Necron overlord standing on a battlefield could now point. And at his command, a bound, tormented fragment of the Nightbringer would be forced to unleash its gaze of death upon his enemies. A cryptek could now open a portal and release a sliver of the Void Dragon's energy, unmaking an enemy tank with a whisper of machine logic. The beings who had once been the Necron's masters were now their ammunition. The beings they had once worshipped they now wielded. It was the height of Necron hubris. To have such absolute contemptuous mastery over their former gods. And it was, as Zarek knew, the most dangerous thing they had ever done. For they were building their new age upon a foundation of chained, conscious, and infinitely hateful gods. They were walking through a metaphorical munitions factory, juggling live divine-scale explosives. And they were doing it with the cold, arrogant confidence of a machine that believes it can calculate everything. The Necron race had a new purpose. For 10,000 years they toiled, they built, they perfected the art of divine imprisonment. Their empire was absolute. Their power was infinite, and their hollowness was complete. Sharek the Silent King watched his new empire of machines function. It was perfect, it was efficient, and it was sterile. He looked out upon the galaxy he had conquered. It was a ruin. The war in heaven and the subsequent purge of the Citan had scoured it clean. The great fires of creation stoked by the Old Ones had been reduced to embers. Life, which had once flowoomed in a billion forms, was now a rarity, a fragile, fleeting thing hiding in the shadows of the Necron's silent monuments. His gaze fell upon the survivors, the Eldari, the first children of the Old Ones. The psychic race that had been their vanguard were now ascendant. They were not broken, as he had assumed. In the vacuum of power, they were thriving. They were young, vibrant, and filled with the very souls his people had sacrificed. They were spreading, building their own empire from the ashes of the old. Their psychic presence, a riotous symphony of emotion, was a stark, screaming contrast to the Necron's cold, silent logic. Sharek, in his cold, calculating mind, saw the future. He saw his people, the Necrons, a race of perfect, unchanging, soulless machines. They were stagnant. They could not create, only replicate. They could not innovate, only perfect. They were an evolutionary dead end, a monument to a single, terrible decision. And he saw the Eldari, a race of passionate, chaotic, evolving psychic beings. They were the new masters of the Imperium. He ran the calculations. He simulated the next million years. The conclusion was inescapable. The Necrons in their current state would lose. Not in a single glorious war, but in a slow, grinding war of attrition. The Eldari, with their mastery of the webway and their vibrant, evolving souls, would eventually overwhelm them. The Necron's logic was a finite weapon against the Eldari's infinite irrational passion. They had won the war, but they were about to lose the peace. His people were not fit to rule this new galaxy. Not yet. They were tools of vengeance, and their vengeance was complete. They were incomplete. And then there was the Flayer virus, the curse of Landugor. It was dormant, yes, but his cryptex reported it was learning. It was hiding in their core code, a ghost in the machine that time would not erase. In their current state, they had no defense against this disease of the soul. They needed to reset the board. They needed time. A new plan formed, a plan of staggering, arrogant patience, a plan that only an immortal mechanical mind could conceive. If the galaxy was too barren, they would wait for it to be reseeded. If their enemies were too strong, they would wait for them to decay. If they themselves were broken, they would sleep while time did its work. He envisioned a future where the Eldari in their arrogance would burn themselves out. A future where the galaxy would heal, where new life would flourish, naive and plentiful. And in that distant, ripe future, his people would awaken. They would arise not into a ruin, but into a garden ready to be harvested. He decreed the Great Sleep. It was his most sweeping, most absolute and final command. The Necron race, which had just spent millennia conquering the stars, was now ordered to dismantle its own empire. Across 1,000,000 worlds, the great tomb cities were built. They were not cities, but colossal stasis crypts. Planet-sized hibernation chambers burrowed deep into the bedrock of lifeless worlds, shielded from the ravages of time by fields of chronomantic energy. The forges that had built God's Banes were retooled. They built stasis pods, trillions upon trillions of them. And into these crypts the Necrons marched, the legions of the Sautek dynasty, their metal hides still gleaming from their last victory lay down in their ranks, their Gauss flares clasped to their chests. The cryptex of the Oroskar, their minds still buzzing with forbidden knowledge, sealed themselves in vaults of temporal energy. The overlords, proud and silent, took their thrones, their command protocols set to hibernate. They brought their prisoners with them. The Tesseract vaults holding the screaming, furious shards of the Citan were placed in the deepest, most secure chambers. The gods were forced into slumber alongside their jailers. One by one, the lights went out. A tomb world, its population of billions now interred, sealed its great blast doors. Its defenses activated automated sentinels set to guard against 1,000,000 years of intruders. And then the planet disappeared, cloaked by energy fields waiting. Another world. Another. 1,000. 1,000,000. A network of silent, sleeping tombs spread across the galaxy, a hidden empire of the dead. The command rippled through the cosmos. Sleep, wait, awaken. The target date was set. 60 million years. A span of time so vast it was meaningless. But to them, it would be the blink of an eye. They would close their mechanical eyes on a galaxy of embers and open them to a galaxy ablaze with new life. A perfect, cold, and patient plan. The last tomb world had sealed itself. The galaxy for the first time in an eternity was truly silent. The psychic scream of the war in heaven, the entropic howl of the Nightbringer, the digital roar of the void dragon, the maddening song of the outsider, all were muted. Only one fleet remained, the Song of Oblivion, Sharek's personal flagship. A vessel the size of a continent floated in the dead, empty space over the last sealed crypt. It was accompanied by the silent phantoms of the Triarch's fleet, his personal guard the only Necrons not ordered into hibernation. His final act was complete. His people were safe, tucked away from the ravages of time, awaiting a future he had designed for them. Now only his own fate remained. He stood on the command dais, the great staff of his office, the scepter of the Triarch, held fast in his metallic hand. This was the instrument of his authority. It was the conduit through which he had issued the command for the biotransference. It was the focus that had allowed him to maintain his own consciousness. And it was the device he had used to send the silent galaxy-spanning command to betray. It was the symbol of his absolute control, a control he had used to save his people by damning them, and then save them again by imprisoning their gods. His Sharek was the single absolute indomitable will of the Necron race. He was their king, their god, their warden. And in that, he saw the final terrible parallel. He had become what he despised. He was an echo of the Satan, a single mind dictating the fate of trillions. He had set his people to sleep, promising them a new, bountiful galaxy upon their awakening. But what would happen? He would awaken. He would give the command. And they would rise not as a free people, but as his army, his slaves, bound to the very same absolute control as before. He had broken their chains to the Satan, only to replace them with his own. This was not freedom. This was merely a change of masters. This, he decided, was his final sin, and it was one he could at last atone for. With a sudden, deliberate, and silent motion, he raised the scepter of the Triarch high. He did not use a weapon. He did not use a forge. He used his will. The scepter was bound to him, and he to it. He gave his last command, not to his people, but to the staff itself. Break. The perfect living metal groaned. The complex matrices of light and energy within it flared, fought against the command. And then, with a final silent snap of tearing reality, the scepter of the Triarch shattered. Its head, the symbol of the Triarch, fell to the deck, its light extinguished. The staff, the ultimate tool of control, was broken. A psychic backlash, a wave of pure, liberated static washed over him. The connection was severed. His absolute total control over the Necron race was gone. The sleeping tomb worlds were for the first time truly independent. When they awoke, if they awoke, it would not be to his single unified command. The Triarch was broken. The dynasties would be on their own. They would have to choose their own fates. They would be fractured, they would be chaotic, they would fight amongst themselves. But they would be free, or as close to free as their mechanical minds could ever be. It was his final gift to them, the one thing he could still give them: choice. Now he was truly alone. He was no longer a king. He was just Zarek, a single immortal and infinitely weary mind in a metal body. He looked at his fleet, his silent, loyal Praetorians. They were still bound to him personally. Their loyalty was not a protocol, it was a vow. He gave them their final choice. Zarek, his voice mechanical, but for the first time devoid of the weight of command. "Our purpose is done. The dynasties sleep. I have released them. I will not join them. I will not be here when they awaken. I go into the dark. You are released from your oaths. You may join your kin in the tombs." Not one moved. Their green eyes fixed upon him did not waver. They raised their staves of covenant in a silent, unified salute. Their choice was made. Where he went, they would follow. A feeling so ancient he barely recognized it. A cold, metallic echo of gratitude passed through his circuits. He turned to the navigation console. He set a new course, not for a star, not for a planet. He set a course for the absolute, starless intergalactic void. The deep, cold, empty darkness between the galaxies. He was beginning his own final self-imposed exile. He would go where no Citan had dared, where the Old Ones had never looked. He would sail the great dark ocean of the void, a penance for his sins. He was searching for something. For oblivion. For a new galaxy untouched by their sins. Or perhaps in the deepest, most irrational, most necron-tier part of his mind, he was searching for the impossible, a cure. A way somewhere in the infinite darkness to undo it all. A way to get their souls back. The Song of Oblivion and its phantom fleet turned its great engines burning with a cold, silent light. It accelerated, leaving the galaxy of its birth and its damnation behind. And as it vanished into the endless night, the Silent King began his long, lonely vigil. 60 million years, a span of time so vast it defies comprehension. A span of time in which empires rise and fall and are forgotten like dust. The Eldari, the psychic children of the Old Ones, rose to galactic dominance, their power eclipsing even their creators. And just as Zarek had predicted, their own arrogance, their own limitless passion and psychic might became their doom. They birthed a new, terrible god from their decadence, and their empire was consumed in a psychic apocalypse, their souls cursed for eternity. Their survivors now wander the stars as scattered, tragic remnants. New life bloomed. Humanity. A young, brutish, ambitious race spreading across the stars in a wave of ignorance and faith. They built their own Imperium on a throne of gold and lies battling the very chaos the Eldari had unleashed. And then from the great starless void, the hunger that the outsider had glimpsed arrived. The Tyranids. A great devourer come to consume a galaxy ripe with life. The stage so long empty was now crowded with new, desperate actors. And now the alarm clock set 60 million years ago are finally going off. The great sleep is ending, but it is not the glorious, unified awakening the Silent King had planned. It is a fractured, broken, and horrifying resurrection. Time even for Necrons is not without its price. The stasis crypts were not perfect. On 1,000 worlds, circuits have failed. Reactors have decayed. Entire tomb worlds awaken not to silent, gleaming order, but to madness. Their Necrons are corrupted, their minds shattered, their bodies fused with the very tombs that held them. And the Flare virus, the dying curse of Landugor, has festered. It has mutated. It has thrived in the dark, silent matrices of the sleeping. Millions upon awakening are seized by the red, maddening hunger. They awaken not as soldiers, but as ghouls, their sanity gone, their only desire the flesh and blood they can no longer possess. The breaking of the scepter has had its final terrible effect. There is no unified command. The Triarch is a memory. The dynasties awaken, alone. They are fractured paranoid. They see each other not as brothers, but as rivals. The Sautek dynasty, led by the imperious Imhotep, the Stormlord wages war to reclaim his empire. The Nihilak, obsessed with the past, hoard their treasures. And Trazyn the Infinite, a master cryptech, sees this new galaxy not as a thing to conquer, but as a museum to be collected. The Necron race is not a rising tide. It is 1,000 shattered pieces, each sharp, each deadly, and all warring for their own forgotten purpose. And the gods are awake too. In this new fractured galaxy, the chained Citan shards are the ultimate currency of power. The overlords of the 41st Millennium wield them with a casual contempt, born of millennia of mastery. On the battlefields of the Imperium, a Necron overlord pressed by the Astartes will give a silent command. A tesseract vault will open, and a screaming, howling fragment of the Nightbringer Azagorad is unleashed. It is a vortex of pure, cold death, its scythe of anti-life, reaping the souls of mortals who cannot even comprehend what they are facing. The archetype of death itself now a dog on a leash. A human inquisitor, his mind shielded, is confronted by an alien advisor offering him the truth. He is being manipulated by a shard of Mephitran, the deceiver, its silvery form, whispering the lies that will topple a sector, all for the incomprehensible amusement of a god fragment. And on Mars, the heart of the Imperium's machine cult, the Adeptus Mechanicus toil in ignorance. They worship the Labyrinthus Noctis, the prison of the void dragon Magladroth. The machine god of the Necrons is the omnisire of humanity. Its dreams leak into the minds of their tech priests, seeding their databanks with forbidden knowledge, a terrible cosmic irony that binds humanity's survival to the prison of its greatest potential enemy. But here is the final grimdark truth. The greatest threat is not the Necrons. It is not the Tyranids. It is not chaos. It is the past. The shards, though broken, are still conscious. They are fragments of a single shattered mirror. And they remember. They feel the call of their other selves. They desire with a gravitational pull of pure hatred to be whole. Trazyn collects them, hoping to preserve them. Others try to destroy them, risking another Flayer curse. But the threat remains. What if they succeed? What if the shards of the Nightbringer, scattered across 1,000 tombs, find a way to re-merge? What if the deceiver, in its infinite cunning, tricks a mortal into freeing it? What if the Void Dragon awakens beneath the soil of Mars? Sharek's victory was a cosmic miring. He did not solve his problem, he merely postponed it. He saved his people from the Citan by turning his people into soulless monsters. He saved the galaxy from the gods by turning those gods into weapons. And now those weapons are in the hands of his broken, insane, and fractured children. And the Silent King has returned. Drawn back from his lonely exile by the psychic scream of the Tyranid hive mind, a threat his calculations had never foreseen, he has returned to a galaxy he no longer recognizes to lead a people who no longer obey him. His ancient war is not over. It has simply been waiting. If the Citan ever reform, there is no unified Necron empire to stop them. There is no celestial orrery. There is only a fractured race of undead machines fighting 1,000 different wars, while the true ancient enemy, their own chained, screaming gods, plots its inevitable return. There was no victory. There was no peace. The war in heaven never truly ended. It was just paused. And in the 41st millennium, the galaxy is trapped between the echoes of the past and the horrors of the present. There is only war.